Hey everyone, Mr. Planetech back again. Just wanted to let you, next video that we have for homework this week is going to be walk you through making a graph on Excel. Graphing is going to be something that we do in this class quite a bit, so I want to make sure that you guys are proficient in it, especially using something to help you out. I use Excel just because of the thing that I'm most familiar with, I have easiest access to, but there are other graphing programs out there if you have a Mac or something like that. All other graphing programs really should be able to do the things that Excel can do, especially the sort of basic stuff that I'm going to ask you to do as far as making the graph, putting in a trend line, titles, axes, labels, things like that. So I'm not, by no means do you have to use Excel, but there are certain things that you are going to be required to put on your graphs to make sure that you are labeling them properly and make sure we know what we're looking at, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the floating tools so that the toolbar over on the left-hand side shouldn't appear because we're not going to need that today. So if that's an issue for you, there you go. It's gone. All right. First thing you need to do, you need to open up Excel. I don't care how you do it, it doesn't matter. Most of you at home might have a shortcut on your desktop, whatever. At school, generally, if you go to the Start menu, go to Programs, Microsoft Office, and then where's Excel? There it is. We use Excel 2007 in this class, or in the school. That's the software that we have on these computers. Excel 2003 should be able to do, not should, really can do all the things that I'm asking you to do. It might look different on your computer at home, but you need to figure out where it is. If you're having some troubles, let me know, and I'll kind of point you in the right direction. So before we make a graph, first thing we need to do is we need to have a set of data. In this class, we're almost exclusively going to be dealing with scatter graphs. Scatter graphs require two sets of data. So you were basically making two measurements. I'm just going to give you an example, so it really doesn't, what these measurements are doesn't make a distance or doesn't make a difference, but a lot of times it's going to be like distance and time, force and time, depending on what lab we're doing, but most of the time, or most of the cases when we're doing labs, it's going to be some measurement over time. So time's going to be our one measurement, and then whatever we're measuring is going to be the other measurement. So you need to put some data in. Doesn't really matter where you put it in on the spreadsheet, it just kind of needs to be together. Excel by default looks at things in columns, so I usually say just do it in columns. So for example, if this is by convention, or by default, I guess, Excel always puts what's in the first column of your selected data on the x-axis of your graph, if you're making a scatter graph, which most of the time we're going to be in this class. So think about that. Whatever you want on your x-axis generally should go in the first column. Whatever you want on your y-axis generally should go on the second column. You can fix it. It's just a little bit, takes a little more time. It's not real hard, but, if you just kind of put it in the correct way to begin with, should be able to take care of it. So I'm just going to put in some fake data. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay? One thing to remember that when you're putting in numbers into these columns, into these cells in Excel, make sure that you only have numbers in there. You can have decimals, and that's fine. And if you put like 1.0, just like just like a calculator, a non-graphing calculator, it's going to get rid of that 0.0 value. It doesn't distinguish between 1.0 and 1. Okay, it's the same number as far as the computer is concerned. One thing that you can't do, though, is that you can't put units in with these values. So if you put like 1 centimeter, that's going to confuse it. It's not going to know what to do, especially when it comes to graphing. It just shows up as text here on the screen, but when you go to graph it, it won't know what to do. So only numbers. All right. First thing you need to do, you need to highlight the cells that you want to make a graph of. All right, so I just highlighted those first 10 cells, 5 in the first column, 5 in the second column. And then I'm going to go up to the top and click the Insert tab. And in the middle of the toolbar up on the top after you click the Insert tab, it has a bunch of different kinds of graphs that you can make. the most common types of graphs that people make, it has sort of like quick links, but then you can go other charts. There's a bunch of other things. We're almost, like I said, exclusively going to be dealing with a scatter graph. Don't do a line graph. A line graph is not the same thing. Scatter graph, like it says here on the description, also known as an XY chart. This type of chart compares pairs of values. Use it when the values being charted are not in x-axis order, blah, 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 or when they represent separate measurements. That's really the key. That's what we're doing when we're making a scatter graph. So if you click the scatter tab, a bunch of different options come up. Okay, you can just put points, you can connect the dots with smooth graphs, you can connect the dots with jagged graphs, smooth it all out, get rid of the dots, all these different things. But we're almost exclusively, unless you hear otherwise, going to deal with this one in the top left, where we're just plotting the points. We're going to put in the line manually a little bit later. The reason why, hopefully you remember way back from physical science or in 7th grade, whenever you learned how to graph, making a graph does not consist of connecting the dots, all right? So we're just going to first put the dots. So if I click that tab that has just the points there, click it once, boom, there it is. The graph shows up, all right? All it did was plot the points. First column on the x-axis, second column on the y-axis. But we're not done yet. You'll notice when it makes this graph, up at the top, big green bar, it says Chart Tools. And then it has a Design tab, a Layout tab, and a Format. If you put your columns correct to begin with, you should be good as far as the Design tab is concerned. You shouldn't have to do too much there. When we get a little bit more advanced, I'll show you some things that you need to do on the Design tab. But right now, basically, we should be good. The big tab that you want is pretty much the Layout tab. The Layout tab is where we're going to make this graph look nice and pretty. So, first things first. If we only have one set of data on this graph, which in this case we do, right? I don't need to see this legend over here on the right-hand side. I know what this, just based on, if there's only one set of data, based on the label on the x-axis and the label on the y-axis, I should be able to tell what this graph is showing me. So in Excel, automatically by default just makes this label as series 1, which doesn't really tell us anything to begin with. So if you come up to the top, legend, click the tab, top one just says none, turn off legend. So if you click that, boom, gets rid of it, formats it to the size of the window, we're good to go. Okay? All right. Next, not far left, but about a third of the way across, chart title. I don't really care which one you use, but your chart has to have a title. It has to be a descriptive title, all right? Don't just tell me, or make it descriptive so that somebody who's looking at it real quick can tell, all right, this is what this graph is showing me. Distance versus time for a moving object. Force versus time for a collision, or whatever it is that you're graphing. I don't really care which one you use, center overlay or above chart, and there's a bunch more title options, but one of these two will be fine. I usually like the above chart one just because it sort of sets itself off, and then just blank chart title comes in. So if you go click in here, all right, and then it's just a text box, so you can highlight it, and then I'm just going to put, because I haven't put anything, I don't really know what I'm graphing here, I just made up numbers, I'm just going to put descriptive title. And if you hit return, it goes down to the next line. So don't do that. Just click off of it, and boom, there it is. Okay? All right, next. Notice that when I clicked off of the chart, my green bar that says Chart Tools went away. I can get that back real quick just by clicking anywhere inside the chart. Green Chart Tools comes back. We're still on the Layout tab. The next two important things, axis titles, okay? And it'll let you do each one separately. So primary horizontal axis, primary vertical axis. Let's start with the horizontal axis. Really, you only got one option with the horizontal axis, either none, which you don't want, and then you want title below axis. So if you click on that, right, there it is. It kind of puts in blank title here at the bottom, right? Click in there, it's just a text box, and then something descriptive. X-axis value, which isn't very descriptive, but I just made up numbers, so it really doesn't matter. And then make sure that you're putting in a unit, okay? So that we are making sure that we understand what it is that we're measuring, but then also, what unit are we measuring it in, okay? Click anywhere out of the text box, it automatically shows up. Okay. Notice this time I clicked inside of the window of the graph, so my chart tools bar didn't go away on the top. So next, axis titles, primary vertical axis. There's a bunch of different ways that you can show the vertical axis title on a graph. Like I said, I really don't care. The one I like the best is rotated title because it just takes up the least amount of room and it's still easiest for me to read. So you can use vertical title, just changes the way the words are. Horizontal title kind of makes the graph start getting kind of small, so I usually don't like that one the most. I like rotated title the best, but like I said, as long as you have a title, it really doesn't matter. So I'll click rotated title, and then once again, my blank axis or my blank text box comes up. So I click in there, like I said, it's just a text box. So then I'm gonna go y-axis value, and then once again, I'm going to go unit in parentheses. Now, something to keep in mind. Sometimes we're going to need to use subscripts or superscripts within our title or within our X titles because that's how we measure, second squared or something, right? So if you do, if you need to put in some kind of like subscript or superscript or something like that, don't just use the caret. It just looks shabby. So here's what you do. You go to your text box and you highlight whatever it is that you're trying to subscript or superscript or whatever it is. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight the whole unit word. Okay, then if you kind of mouse over it, you'll get this little text, or you'll get the little box that shows up, and if you go across it, it'll go from being faded to being actual solid. But all the things that we need aren't there. So if you right click this highlighted word, one of your options that comes up is font. And if you click font, you get a bigger box that has a lot of the same options that showed up on the little faded box, but some more that we can use here, namely superscript, subscript. So if I click superscript, it automatically goes offset 30%. That's fine. It looks fine. Hit OK, and boom, there it is. Okay, so if you need to do that because of the measurement that we took, make sure that you do that. Don't use that caret. It just looks amateurish. All right, so we got our chart. Title, axis titles, units, points on the chart, almost good to go, okay? Last thing we need to do is the trend line, okay? Now, you can click this here, all right? And get you a bunch of trend line options. You may have learned this when you were graphing as the line of best fit, or the best fit line or best fit curve or whatever it is. Okay, it goes by a bunch of different names, so it's basically the same concept, right? What we're trying to do here is we're trying to show trends in numbers. That's the reason why we graph a lot of times. It's a lot easier to see trends in numbers when you're looking at a picture than it is if you're looking at just a bunch of data that you've typed into a chart. So, but what we want to do is the last thing that we want to do before we finish is we want to make sure we put in a trend line to show the relationship, to show the trends in those numbers. So this one here is pretty straightforward. In fact, that, because of the data that I chose, it's pretty much a straight line. So I'm going to pick linear in this case. Right? Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes exponential, but if you click the trend line tab at the bottom, you get more trend line options. If you click that window, you get a couple more. We're going to use the power trend line quite a bit. Sometimes we'll use polynomial. These are hopefully all things that sound familiar from math class. I'll get you those as we start working on more complex graphs, when we start looking at things that are different than linear. But another thing that you get as far as trendline options is concerned, so here, the trendline options window, linear is clicked, which is what we want, but then if you come down to the bottom, display equation on chart. What Excel does is that it looks at the line that you've put in and it fits a mathematical equation to that line, which can be important, especially if we're looking to forecast forward. If we're looking to make predictions off of the trend in the numbers that we're seeing, getting an equation is going to be helpful for that, because then if we know, like, let's say time is on our x-axis, if we want to know the value, well, hold on. So click linear, check display equation on chart. Don't worry about the r squared value. That just gives you a little bit as far as checking how good your line is. But I'm going to hit close now, and boom, there's my line. It shows up. And with that line showing up, I get this box, y equals 2x. It has fit an equation to the trend line that is drawn to fit the numbers that I put into that chart. Okay? Back to the equation. The equation can be important if we want to find the value of this equation or a value of this experiment or whatever it is that we were measuring at a time that we didn't actually measure. We can't measure the distance of an object at every single time imaginable. Just, limitations of our measuring equipment, limitations of how we do things as humans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we measure values at certain time intervals, look for a pattern, figure out the pattern, we can then make predictions about what the value of that measurement should have been at a time that we didn't specifically measure it. Okay? For instance, let's say time is on the x-axis in this equation, or in this chart that we've made, and then let's say distance is on the y-axis. Okay? So I've labeled everything blah, blah, blah. That means that in this equation, the y value is going to represent distance because it's on the y-axis. The x value is going to represent time because it's on the x-axis. If we have actual values, we can go in and we can substitute those values into that equation to make that equation more descriptive to what we're actually doing. So instead of keeping it just generic y and x, we can go in and make it d and t for distance on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. You just go in and you type it in. Okay, it's just a text box. If it's force and time, you can go in and make F on the Y for the Y value and then X or T for the X value to represent force and time. Okay? But if we've only measured the distance value at 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and 5 seconds, but now we see a pattern developing. So if we wanted to predict where this object would be at, let's say 7 or 8 seconds, we can do that. All we do is we plug in 7 or 8 or whatever time we want to find out in for the x value in this equation, solve the equation for y, and that'll be our prediction. Okay? So displaying the equation on chart, important. Make sure we do it on all of our graphs once we put in the trend line. Okay? Last thing, let's print. Okay? So you got a couple of options. Okay? First, notice how I have this light blue line that's surrounding my chart that I've created. I'm not sure how well that's going to show up when you watch it on the screen, but there is a light blue border outlining that graph. If I click over in the squares, the cells of the spreadsheet, the light blue border goes away. So I click the light blue border. All right. Right click. All right. And print doesn't come up. That's okay. So I've clicked on my chart, light blue border, come up to my start menu, right? The office button, click there, and I hit print, and I always like to print preview just to see what I'm looking at, and then I go there. Okay, notice that only the chart has shown up, none of the numbers. Because I have that light blue border around it, only the chart is going to show up, none of the actual values, which is okay in most cases. Close print preview. It'll take me back to my spreadsheet. Okay? If I'm not clicked on that chart to get the light blue border, and I go to the office button there, and I do print and print preview, notice it'll show me the cells that I put in, the data that I put in, but then also the chart. And my chart is, not there anymore. Okay, so I can move that over next to the numbers like this. The dotted line represents the edge of the page, so if you're looking to keep everything on one page, which you should, just, it looks better if the whole chart's on the same page, and second, it saves us paper. So now we can go back to the office button, click print preview. Oh, notice only the chart showed up, because if I go back to my spreadsheet, blue border is still around the chart. I click off of that, blue border goes away, office button, print preview, there it is. Okay? We can, set this up different ways, but we'll get into details as far as that is concerned later on. All right? So hopefully that walks you through Excel graphing. It's, basic, but for our needs, it's going to do pretty well as far as this class is concerned. I have heard on multiple occasions that people that have learned how to use Excel in my class, when they go to college, it puts them at an advantage over those over a lot of other people. how much are you going to use it? That really depends on the field you're going into and the professors that you have. But it's a good skill to have. Definitely, if you're going into science, but there's also, if you're going into something like econ or business where you have to look at charts and stuff like that, it's definitely something that's going to help you out. So, hopefully informative, and we'll come back tomorrow and we'll start doing some practice in the library. You'll have a couple of days in the library to practice a couple of things from the book, and then quiz coming up in a couple of days. All right? See you tomorrow in class.